Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and traces from technologies like Istio, AppMesh, and Envoy. Plus, Datadog's Service Map automatically plots out the dependencies in your microservices architectures for seamless, context-rich troubleshooting. With rich visualizations, algorithmic alerting, and more than 250 vendor-supported integrations, Datadog allows you to monitor your distributed applications in real time. Start a free 14-day trial today by visiting datadog.com/cloudcast. And Datadog will send you a great free t-shirt. That's datadog.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Good to be back with everybody. We are almost to the end of July. We are almost into August, the dog days of summer, as they say. Actually, some of the news, cloud news of the week, is starting to come back after a kind of a slow week last week where we had to backtrack on some things because not a lot got announced. But we've got a number of things for cloud news of the week, so why don't we just get right to it. First thing is GitHub announced a public roadmap. So public product roadmap for GitHub, stored and hosted out on GitHub, but beginning to see this from some of the major cloud services, right? We've seen this a little bit with AWS. We see it a little bit. Now we're seeing it with GitHub. It is nice to, especially in places where people aren't 100% sure about, kind of future of what's going on. In GitHub's case, are they going to remain independent? Are they going to be tied more to Azure? So really nice job by the GitHub team. I took a dive through it. Erica Burchard talked about this in a blog post today. So good to see that from the GitHub team. Second, and this is about a week or so old. I think we just sort of missed this, maybe because we were on vacation. Oracle announced something they called Oracle Dedicated Region Cloud at Customer. And this is essentially if you want the Oracle Cloud on-premise or in some location, like a colo location, Oracle will bring the entire thing to you. So this is sort of an interesting trend. I know we've seen some things in the past. We've seen things like Azure Stack and AWS Outpost that bring something on-prem for you, but then they don't provide all of the services of the cloud. They provide a subset. Well, this is all of the services of the Oracle Cloud, including all of the HCM, CRM, ERP, full autonomous database thing. So sort of an interesting thing for Oracle. It's the pricing and the kind of capacity is a little bit vague in places. The pricing is, as they say, $500,000 a month, but they don't necessarily give all the details of what's included in that. But interesting to see Oracle start to take a little bit different approach. They had done like Exadata and Exa things a while ago where they brought you like a rack. Now they're bringing you an entire data center, racks, services, all those sort of things fully managed. So that's sort of interesting announcement from Oracle Cloud. The third thing on our list is we're starting to get into earnings season. I thought we were going to have all the earnings out. We're going to miss a couple of them by a couple of days. We'll cover them next week. But both Microsoft and IBM announced their earnings. So Microsoft, will just touch on the Azure part of it, announced a run rate of now over $50 billion for what they call intelligent cloud. That includes, things like Office 365. It includes Azure Cloud and so forth. The Azure piece was announced as being up 47%. This was down slightly in terms of like percentage growth. They were up 59% last quarter. So down a little bit. Not sure if that's due to, a little less usage because of COVID, or if it's because of some of the things that we heard about the Azure Cloud having some capacity slowdowns or, availability. But anyway, still a very, very healthy quarter for the Azure team, and up above $50 billion run rate. So it's becoming, as they say, a pretty big business, a few billion here, a few billion there, and all of a sudden you got a big number. And then finally, IBM announced their earnings. Their cloud numbers were up 13% on a $22 billion run rate. The Red Hat part of the business is up 18 to 20%, I believe it was. So healthy quarter for IBM. Again, some guidance around COVID, but good to see the cloud business there growing as well. So we will get to both the Google announcements and the AWS announcements next week as they come out in the next few days. The good news is we won't have to say anything bad about Amazon or AWS because if we ever want to be apparently Amazon podcast, you are not allowed to say anything bad about Amazon. So it's very likely that the Cloudcast will never be an Amazon podcast, but that's okay. There are plenty of other ways to get the Cloudcast. So we're going to have a fun show this week. Really good personality. I'll just leave it as Pop is coming to join us here right after the break. We're going to talk about Secure DevSecOps right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by StrongDM. Are you managing your remote team as they work from home? Managing a gazillion SSH keys, database passwords, and Kubernetes certs? Meet StrongDM. Manage and audit access to servers, databases, and Kubernetes clusters, no matter where your employees are. With StrongDM, easily extend your identity provider to manage infrastructure access, automate onboarding, offboarding, and moving people within roles. Grant temporary access that automatically expires to on-call teams. Your admins get full auditability into anything anyone does. When they connect, what queries they run, what commands they typed. It's full visibility into everything. For SSH, RDP, and Kubernetes, that means video replays. For databases, it's a single unified query log across all database management systems. StrongDM is used by companies like Hearst, Peloton, Betterment, Greenhouse, and SoFi to manage access. It's more control and less hassle. Start your free 14-day trial today at strongdm.com/cloudcast. That's strongdm.com/cloudcast. StrongDM. Manage and audit remote access to your infrastructure. And we're back. And folks, one of the topics that we love to kind of dig into and sometimes causes us some confusion because, we've covered DevOps for a long time. And then, we get into the nuances of, what makes DevOps successful. And then, how does it actually work in production where people care about what they're doing? They're not just kind of hello world things or measuring things by just purely number of releases. Is we start to get into sort of DevSecOps or securing DevOps or sort of, bringing it to real life in production. And so we thought we'd dig into that a little bit today and excited to have Dan Papandrea or Pop. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I love how you're using some puns already with, dig. We're going to dig with the guy from Sysdig. I got it.
Yeah, absolutely. So field CTO at Sysdig. And I've kind of gotten to know you a little bit in that I've been listening to your podcast, the POPcast, with a lot of really, really good folks. So for folks that maybe aren't listening to POPcast or maybe don't know you, give us a little bit of your background and kind of what got you into this cloud native space.
Oh, yeah, no problem. So I was a director of IT for an investment software company for a number of years. Prior to that, I worked at Comedy Central Television Network.
Oh, cool.
And and basically I ended up moving over to a sales role, basically because we had this flagship product that was an in-memory database that was extrapolating data, like positions and pricing and all this data, and ended up being pulled into so many sales calls. They're like, just move over to sales. So I did that for a number of years, and then I was a product manager when we were moving this, this flagship product over to a cloud product, and I just fell in love with, just cloud paradigm, cloud native. Then I ended up at HPE, and we sold basically the portfolio, which is called Helion, which was like OpenStack. And it's probably a common theme you've heard in the past, is like, people starting in that OpenStack, which was that promise of, IaaS, being able to have a developer click a button and have, resources available. And then I discovered containers, and I'm like, this is it. I love this, and I want to be part of this world. And I, got involved with Sysdig, and been with Sysdig for the last almost 4 years.
Very cool. Very cool. And field CTO. So obviously out talking to lots and lots of companies directly and kind of getting in front of what they're doing. So quick, before we dive into kind of your area of expertise, give folks the 30 seconds on POPcast. I got to know it because I work with a guy named Brian Redbeard and some other folks from CoreOS, and you were interviewing him, and I was like, cool, what is this show? I hadn't heard about it, and I'm hooked. So give us the 30 second on the good work you're doing over there too.
Thank you. And like I say, I'm a big fan of your show as well. So, thanks for having me on. But basically the POPcast in short is basically like, I want to connect folks with the people behind the code, right? Really, it's almost, if you remember like MTV Cribs, right? It was like, you got to see like, how like Snoop Dogg's refrigerator looked like, but basically like for people that are coding, right? So, that's the principle. And also I just love the community. You got to, like you all just being at conferences and seeing folks and this community is in a great one. And there's some great folks working on some wonderful and amazing, brilliant, projects and all that. So being able to go in and talk to them has been fantastic. And we're at 25 episodes. I mean, we had the Godfathers of Kubernetes on. We had Redbeard, and Redbeard, I pretty much like hassled for like, I don't know, 20 episodes until he came on or whatever. But it felt like 20, but it was like 11. But it was a lot of fun. We had Kelsey Hightower on as well, and just a bunch of great people. And I'm so proud of the show and how it's done. It's just been phenomenal. So
yeah, it's good stuff, and you dig into kind of not only the origin of some of how stuff got built, but the personalities of some of these folks who are interesting characters amongst themselves. So yeah, it's a good listen. We're always looking to expand out on stuff where we learn from. So definitely add it to your podcast players. I mentioned DevSecOps or Secure DevOps in the introduction. We lived through, we've kind of gone through different iterations of DevOps. And for some people, it just sort of works. Others struggle with it. And the struggle in a lot of cases is security. Like it was, we were ready to go deploy stuff, and then security stepped in and said, no, that's not what we're doing. Like, where are we with this sort of the mixing of security and DevOps and what's going on in this space?
I mean, the thing that we talk about secure DevOps, and I think what it is that secure DevOps is a workflow, and like DevSecOps is a function. Okay. So it includes like security for lifecycle, like your image scanning, runtime, and IR. But if you're thinking about these processes, you really want to have like a kind of a full spectrum, basically from your build all the way to your post-mortem. And so like when you think about DevSecOps, it really also is like a cultural change as well, right? You need, folks to be like, this concept of DevSecOps doesn't just start with, because in the past, if you saw it, was like these dev teams were procrastinating on security because they were like, they're going to slow us down, right? If we include the security teams, it's going to slow us down. So they didn't have the ability to embed the security, get this comfort level on compliance, monitoring, all of those things. I mean, we did a study, like O'Reilly conducted a adoption survey before COVID, and 88% of organizations were using cloud infrastructure in some form, and they reported that we're going to move their applications within a year. And so being able to like have that embedded security is moving those things over. So at the end of the day, in terms of like overall, like, DevSecOps, it's, and what we call a secure DevOps, it's basically to us, it's a workflow, and it's something that a culture has to adhere to kind of, get to the next step when it comes to this and involve the security teams. The ones that I've worked on with companies that have been successful at it have involved the security teams from jump. But it's hard, because again, they're thinking this is going to allow us to, it's basically going to slow us down, but it just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. Right. It's the equivalent of like, I want to get on the low carb diet, but I also sort of love pizza. And you just, you have to go find that, what are you trying to achieve and what are you willing to give up? And I think, I like that we've sort of moved past DevSecOps or secure DevOps as just kind of like, hey, we threw the word in, so it'll just happen. And now people are codifying it. They're putting a set of tools around it. So like you said, it's a workflow. It's something you can look at and go, okay, that's going to be successful. That has all the elements that you need to be successful.
So if you think about that diet analogy, like secure DevOps is pretty much like the stevia, right? It's going to give you that sugar rush, right? That whole monk fruit taste, and it's going to get you past there, but it's going to be none of those carbs that you crave.
Right. So let's talk about it in the context of containers, because it's, we're seeing containers, Kubernetes, kind of taking off. It's kind of becoming the technology of choice for these more agile application teams. There's stuff in the container world that feels sort of secure by nature, right? So like we can scan containers, we can sign them, you can lock down content, which registry it comes from, and yet we still sort of struggle with containers because it's a user space technology, and for a lot of, I don't know, application teams, they were used to getting like root access to the whole box and full access to stuff. Like, how are people adapting to this idea that maybe you only get container space, or user space, and how do I make containers work in that world, whereas maybe before I had full access to the box?
And again, it's a really great point. And what I will say to that is I did a talk at Escape 2019. Escape was a show, it was like a multi-cloud, Cockroach DB put it on.
Okay.
And it was a great show. And I can put a link for your listeners to I can give you a link for that. But basically, the thing to think about is, it isn't just vulnerability scanning on production scan. You have to look at, again, that overall workflow, meaning if you're embedding security, you're looking at runtime protection, you're looking at post-mortem functions as well, because, having these immutable systems, you still need to be able to see things like, minor, like if you look at, like if you're using public cloud or private cloud, there might be some folks trying to use like crypto jacking functions and all those things. So you have to have like a runtime piece. So what I did in this escape talk was basically I deployed the vendor who put on the show's image, and the vulnerability scan was just fine. However, on stage, I hacked into their config file and allowed anyone to come in and make the changes to their config file, passwords or whatever, to be able to show that, look, vulnerability scanning is great. If you do not have a full level of workflow, it's really not going to enhance your capabilities, and also like monitoring capabilities. And one of the things too, I will say, is we just launched this thing called Sysdig Essentials, which is pretty awesome. It's basically like 5 workflows for security. So if you're trying to think about that whole holistic view, like whole the Secure DevOps kind of workflow, you have all of this in like a 5-minute setup. You install our agent in 1 minute, and then you have all of this in an onboarded setup. So we're basically securing you from your registries, the underlying host. We do a baseline scan of the underlying hosts that are running containers. Then we do runtime and visibility, all with one agent and one immutable backend. So it's pretty amazing. And again, it's going to help those folks that are thinking about making that leap over, and they're like, how do I involve my security team, but also be able to speedily, is that even a word?
Yeah.
Pretty speedily deploy out these applications fast. Yeah. So.
Yeah, very cool. So for folks maybe that don't know Sysdig, if you've been around the CNCF events, the Kubernetes events, you've seen the Sysdig folks around. But like maybe for folks who don't know Sysdig, give us the quick overview on where you fit into that set of security tools that are going to allow you to keep going fast, but also make sure you're secure.
So I'll start with our founder. Our founder is Loris DiGiovanni, who's one of the people that had founded, if anyone's listeners aware of, like TCP Dumper Wireshark.
Okay.
And so he's one of the key original developers of this. And so what we have is the ability to tap into kernel to really help you confidently secure and or run, your DevOps and Kubernetes kind of deployments and containerized workloads. And that's what we do. We basically have this SaaS deployment for Essentials that you can, and also we can do it on prem as well, of these components to be able to really, give you a complete kind of workflow for secure DevOps.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. And there's a technology that folks talk about a lot that's called Falco. I'm not a security folks, so sometimes when I dig into it, like stuff doesn't always make sense. What does Falco do, and kind of why are people sort of attracted to it, sort of love this idea of what it does?
So Falco is one of our projects in the CNCF. It's not a graduated product; it's an incubated project at this point. But basically, what it is a behavioral kind of behavioral runtime rules engine that you can apply to your environment and be able to set rules like somebody terminaling into a container or somebody writing to a sensitive directory, right? And having this stream that you can send out to your downstream, event management systems, either that you've built like a Splunk or some of those other tools. So that's kind of what we do, and why it's gained such amazing adoption is its ease of use. Is you can have this, and then you have this readily language that you can kind of tweak for all of this like real-time detection, all that. And what's part of that basically is the engine for our commercial products. So if you think about what I talked about in the Essentials deployment, you're getting all of those kind of underlying security, monitoring, compliance based off of this amazing kind of open source foundation that we've done. Which is, again, like that's why we're part of like the CNCF, from that project forward or whatever, is because our capabilities are really grounded in open source. Just like if you think about like Red Hat, if you think about really grounded in open source, and then building like a commercial foothold on top of that. Okay.
So in a past life, I did some things with IDS and intrusion detection, like compare and contrast those, Falco to those things, right? Those things were very signature based. They sort of expected that the hosts were going to be vulnerable, and they sort of knew what to look for. Like, what do these new generations look for, especially when quote unquote environments are kind of immutable, like containers you don't necessarily touch, but talk about what goes wrong and what it does, maybe in that context. Is that a kind of a comparison you see a lot?
Those and the HIDs and those type of thing, host intrusion detection, all of those, we hear that a lot, but we're kernel based and we're more behavioral.
Okay.
So that means that there's a full set of rules that you get out of the box, either with our a open source tool or commercial. And so it's more of not just like things like, oh, somebody touched this file, or somebody terminaled in. It's also like, hey, I have this tapping into, the Cube audit stream. So if somebody created a namespace or somebody created a user that they shouldn't have, I want to get notified of that, because maybe I do want to, have an admission controller or something of like that ilk, stop that from happening. Or I have an image of some sort, and this is something again that like we can tap into conventions of admission controls to be able to do, but it's basically that function to be able to say, okay, I don't want to allow this in my environment because I want to ensure my configuration is pristine. So that's kind of what you do with our tool versus like a normal like HIDs or something like that.
Gotcha. So yeah, and the behavioral piece is the interesting thing, because the other ones were very based on known signatures. You constantly had to sort of make sure you were downloading the most recent ones, and if it was a new attack, you were kind of SOL because it wasn't going to be in that library of known attacks. The behavioral stuff sounds like it's much more of like, we know things that are good behaviors, we know what are bad behaviors or suspect, and we're looking more for that than maybe a fingerprint or a known kind of entity type of thing.
And the language we have is basically looking at very similar kind of conventions, meaning like you could look at this and say, okay, I want to be able to list these things as, I want to understand like this file descriptor.
Okay.
And if I have that, and I can basically create regex for that, so I can have different types of the functions for that. So here's an example that we have, a sample rule that we have. Like you can basically set up a rule for specific network tools that are allowed on your Kubernetes environment. So if somebody spins up a container, which is again uses immutable, and it goes up, I can basically stop that container if I see NCAT. And then what's great about it is we can create a capture, which is very similar to what you think about with like a Wireshark. Instead of every single network packet getting capped into an PCAP file, we have something called an SCAP file, which is basically every single system call that happened when you went in and had that NCAT. So you can understand like what somebody did when they NCAT'd out, like, and use that to get details about that network, which if you're thinking about something that's running in host level, it's not, we're able to interpret that at the user level because we're tapping into the kernel functions to be able to do that. If you think of functions like eBPF, which is, just out of the box kernel functionality, it's a helper that lets you do that. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And again, we're now dealing with the different beast in containers. And so the way you have to think about, kind of dealing with these attacks and these problems has to be different. So very, very cool. We talked a little bit about, kind of the shift that we saw from DevOps to, people throwing DevSecOps into things. Like, you get a chance to talk to a lot of companies that are trying to make these transitions. You probably talk to as many application teams as you do security teams. Like, what are some of the things that they do well? Like, how do you convince the security folks to start kind of sitting, being co-located, shifting left with the application teams? Like, how do those conversations happen? How do you make them feel comfortable that, they're going to be able to adapt to these environments?
I think a lot of times if they're accepting rules as code is a big thing. So basically understanding that these concepts they're not like foreign concepts to one another. It's the same idea as doing access controls on a network device, right? It's the same concept there. So meaning like a lot of the successful ones are basically including the security team, or they have some type of like, incident response team that's basically looking at it and going, well, here's what they are. But a lot of the newer, companies that like have the, this kind of that, this concept already, they're already kind of thinking in terms of DevOps for it. Now, if you think about, enterprises,
yeah, a
lot of the enterprise you're interacting with don't really understand this concept. There's the security team and the other ones on the other room. But if you embed security like as we do, I think it's a really, it's be able to say, wow, you're already having all these features. And also we have this, this pedigree from Wireshark. They're already using the tool from a security perspective. They're like, okay, I get it. Yeah. Like, these are things that like I can really have a thing, because I'm not just looking at this as a vulnerability management. I'm looking at it as a workflow perspective, because network teams, security teams don't like they don't want to be, the stick in the mud, but
Yep.
they also want to be able to like have the same workflows that they have now to be able to troubleshoot like on a specific host that has security issues. They want to have vulnerability management. They want to have host level benchmarking to ensure it's compliant. Applications are compliant. They want to make sure that also they have, a forensic capability to be able to really like runtime and see like, here's my kind of signals, and be able to tell me exactly like what happened at a playback. So that's kind of where we see advantage to that. But when customers, I see, again, going back to that thing we talked about earlier, secure DevOps is a workflow. It is, it's not a function. If the true successful companies we've seen, it's a culture shift. It's like the security teams are involved with the DevOps teams. They understand it's not somebody pushing code. It's, okay, I'm going to push this code. And as part of this code, I'm going to guarantee the configuration policy doesn't have root level access open, or port 22 open for specific things. That resonates, because what we try to do is, I won't have a meeting, to be honest with you, with a customer that I just have the DevOps team involved. If it's a security thing, and we try to get the security teams involved and say, look, there's something in it for you here. You need to understand that this is a workflow that you can be involved in. It's not just somebody pushing something to a repository and then you all have to kind of protect it. It's like, we can protect you from there, and also we can protect you after it's moved up there. And that's also, again, where like, this essentials launch that we just put out is just going to have all of these basic like 5 things out of the box for you already. So things that you would want to think about. So I did a talk about, this too, we did basically like the top 5 considerations with Booz Allen. And it's another link I can send you as well, which is it was really well received. So we basically did we attacked everything from every end of the pipeline, from your cloud, your scanning, container signing. We had OWASP set up for the host. We had it doing Lightkeeper for, signatures. We even had it doing runtime protection. We had all of that happen. We attacked at every level of the pipeline. That resonated so much because we had security teams looking at it and saying, oh my God, you guys have thought about all of these pieces. And Booz Allen was not only using, our commercial tool, they were using open source tools. They were using Falco. They were using, Claire. They were using, OWASP, like people with Google. So they were doing a lot of different things. So yeah, I mean, it's, that was a long-winded way of saying like, we just, it is a culture change, and there's things that you just need to, think about it holistically versus just like, okay, this is, DevSecOps. It's a function. It's a workflow. It's not a function.
Yeah. Anytime I'm learning new stuff, or I'm trying to get across new kind of concepts, I'm always looking for analogies. So I'm curious, you're a sports fan. The people always say, the best games are the ones where you don't know that the umpire was there. You don't know that the referee was there, which basically means like they didn't make a bad call. They weren't egregiously bad. Like when you start seeing these teams, do secure DevOps well, obviously the application teams are going to be, kind of, talking about how many cool features they got and how fast they shipped. Like, is the security group in that case like, hell yeah, they're not telling me we stink. They're not talking about us badly, or like, what's the vibe that comes out of the security people that are now in that team? Do they just sort of take on the vibe of the application team, and they're like, hey man, I was part of us shipping 10 times a day, or, not missing compliance 3 times in a row or something? Like, how does the vibe come out of that in terms of them talking about what they did?
The successful companies that have implemented Sysdig, for instance, have embedded that security. I keep on talking about that concept of embedded security, but I think it's right there because, like you said, it's like they're part of that process. They're seeing a tool that's unobtrusive, that gives them an audit trail that is part of the DevOps function. When they're pushing a package or a set of containers or a manifest together, it's already taken into consideration the security team's thoughts, right? We've already commingled those things in place. And then they also have this comfort level because they have this audit trail. So they can say something didn't come out of that, then we already know the hosts are compliant. We know the applications are compliant because we have, policies and vulnerability places in play, but also we have this peace of mind piece with having underlying piece, which is Falco, but it's built into our security tool, having this completely embedded. The ones that, again, that we've seen be successful are the ones that feel like they're part of that overall full process. They understand what DevOps, they understand how to push, what the mechanics are for pushing an application out, and they've embedded the security in all pieces of that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's important. I mean, it's the less you have people thinking about, kind of what does our org chart look like and so forth, and focusing on, did we make the business successful? Do we make an application successful? And you're including those groups in your successes or failure, I think is the right way to do that. Let me ask you one last question. We've talked about sort of the things to make things right. What are some of the, 2 or 3 common mistakes that you're seeing from probably especially existing companies that weren't, designed around this culture from day one? They're kind of adapting it. What are some mistakes that people could maybe try and avoid, or that you see commonly?
I did a podcast recently with Maya Kichorowski from GitHub, and we were talking about the same concept, and it was basically like people try to boil the goddamn ocean with their security, their secure DevSecOps function, but also even just deploying applications. They wanted to scan, they wanted to do this, and this. It's like, okay, make sure you have practices in place. So first, again, it's that culture change. The other part is embedding the security, like we talked about. If we think about it, again, if you're familiar with, there was a Gartner study by Neil McDonald, and basically he said that DevOps practices will be embedded in 60% of rapid development teams. So if you want to deploy faster, as opposed to 20% in 2019, basically, if you want to deploy faster, you have to kind of think about embedding these things beforehand. The companies that we've seen fail at this are just like, okay, I'm thinking about this after the fact. I'm just going to get my code deployed. So that's the second piece. Yeah. And then the third one, again, is just not, trying to put too many solutions in place. Having 4 different tools that are eating up your resources, that, like we talked about, it can't be unobtrusive. You can't be the person putting all these things. I've seen it where they wanted to have, a vulnerability scanner. They wanted to have a virus scanner in a container. And I'm like, why? It makes zero sense. If there's, there's signatures being created, just make sure that the code that's going in there, has some level of vulnerability scanning. So it's like trying to do too much within the environment, treating it like it is a legacy host. You need to use new tools. You need to have, these, again, unobtrusive tools that are letting folks do development, but are also embedding that security. So those are the 3 things I would say are mistakes that I've seen with a lot of large organizations. But again, the really amazing organizations are thinking about this. They know that they can move much more faster by incorporating these things into their kind of workflows.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff. It's and it's always good to kind of get some experience from the folks that are living with the people in the trenches that have been helping folks do this. Dan, this has been great. We always love to dig into security topics because neither Aaron and I, by any means, are security people. If folks want to pick your brain, obviously maybe listen to the podcast or just pick your brain about some of this, what's the best way to reach you or find out where you're doing podcasts and talks and other stuff?
So, we have us on Sysdig.com. We have a bunch of webinars. If, we have a lot of experts that would talk through a lot of the stuff. I'm, again, when I'm doing, work with Sysdig, it's most of the time doing a lot of specific, customer engagements, because I'm a field CTO. Yep. But, in terms of talks, I mean, I used to do them all the time at a bunch of meetups. So now obviously we can't do them, but if there's ever, you need to definitely get in touch with me. We have our, Sysdig.com. If you can sign up for a trial there of the thing I talked about, Essentials. We're offering 30-day free trials. If you want to kick 14-day free trials. If you want to kick the tires, you can do that as well.
Very cool.
But yeah, I mean, Pop is pretty simple. Pop at Sysdig.com if you ever need anything.
Awesome. Good stuff, man. Well, listen, it was great having you on. And like I said, I'm a big fan of the show. So even though, I know folks have limited amount of time and we love having them on this show, go give POPcast a try. It's a lot of good stuff. Very, very smart folks. You will learn more than you have in 30 or 60 minutes. So good stuff, Dan. Thank you for being on, folks. As always, thank you for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for giving us feedback on iTunes and other places where you get the show. And with that, we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.